The auction barn was alive with a restless energy, a storm of voices and shuffling feet echoing through the rafters. Dust swirled in the air with every slam of hooves against wooden boards, and the acrid smell of sweat and hay hung heavy. Men shouted bids across the crowd, their words sharp and quick, while others leaned on the rails with folded arms, judging the worth of each horse with cold, appraising eyes. It was not a place for the weak or sentimental. It was a marketplace where lives were measured in dollars and strength, not in trust or compassion. Then came the stallion. He burst into the pen with a violence that silenced even the most hardened traders. His coat, though dulled with mud and scars, still shimmered beneath the barn lights, dark as midnight, the kind of black that swallowed reflections. His eyes blazed with fury, wild and unyielding, and each movement of his body screamed defiance. He reared high, striking at the air with hooves sharp enough to crush bone, his scream tearing through the barn like thunder. People recoiled, laughter following close behind, the cruel, kind meant to disguise unease. Untamable, someone spat. Dangerous, another muttered. The auctioneer raised his voice, tapping the gavel against wood as if he could command attention louder than the beast. Here we have a prime specimen, strong as they come. Who'll start the bidding? But no hand lifted. Men smirked, women shook their heads, and a hush spread as Shadow, though no one yet called him that, slammed his weight into the corral gates with a fury that rattled every nail. The board shivered, threatening to give way. Children clung tighter to their mothers' skirts, whispers spreading about the damage he could cause. Amid the murmur, a small figure watched. She was not tall, nor dressed finely like some of the others. Her shoes were worn thin, her dress faded with patches, her hands calloused far beyond her years. Lila, 14, with eyes too old for her face, and a silence that held more weight than words. She stood apart from a crowd, pressed near the back corner, as if the world had taught her the value of not being noticed. Yet her gaze did not waver. Where others saw rage, she saw something different, pain, loss, the raw wound of betrayal shining through the stallion's movements. The auctioneer's voice cracked with frustration. No one. No bid at all. This is a waste of a fine animal. The stallion struck again, nearly toppling a man who had crept too close, sending the crowd into another round of mocking laughter. Worthless, someone shouted. Send him to the meat buyers, another jeered. The words echoed like a death sentence, the air thick with finality. And then, clear and sharp against the noise, came a voice that did not belong. I'll take him. Every head turned. Silence fell so quickly, it was as though the barn itself had taken a breath. There, still standing in her corner, Lila's voice had carried farther than her small frame should have allowed. Her cheeks flushed beneath the sudden stares, but her eyes did not falter. She looked not at the crowd, not at the auctioneer, but directly at the stallion, whose restless pacing slowed at the unfamiliar sound. The auctioneer barked out a laugh, incredulous. You? A girl? This beast isn't a pony for a child's games. His words dripped with mockery, feeding the laughter that rippled once more through the crowd. Do you have the money? Lila hesitated only for a breath, then nodded. From a side stepped an older man, gray in his beard and bent in posture, one of her father's old friends who had followed her here with worried eyes. He placed a calloused hand on the auctioneer's counter and muttered, I'll cover it. For her. The auctioneer's grin spread, greedy and sharp. The gavel fell. Sold. Chaos followed. Hands scrambled to ready the halter, but every man who dared step near the stallion recoiled, their ropes slapped aside, their arms nearly broken by his thrashing power. Leave it, Lila said quietly, stepping forward. Her voice was not loud, yet it cut through the air. She carried nothing but herself, no whip, no chain. The crowd jeered again, hungry for spectacle, whispering of blood and broken bones. The stallion turned toward her, ears pinned back, teeth bared. His body quivered with tension, coiled like a spring ready to strike. Every muscle screamed warning. He lunged once, his jaws snapping just short of her arm, the sound sharp enough to chill the spine. Gasps rang out, but Lila did not flinch. Her heart hammered so loudly she feared it might betray her, yet she held her ground. For a moment their eyes locked, hers steady and unyielding, his blazing with fire and something deeper, a shadow of sorrow buried beneath the rage. She did not move closer, nor did she retreat. She simply stood, breathing slow, as though daring him to see she would not break. The crowd's noise faded, distant and unimportant. There was only the girl and the horse, two wounded creatures staring across the gulf between them. At last, farmhands forced the stallion into the waiting trailer with ropes and prods, his fury shaking the vehicle as though it were made of paper. Lila climbed up beside it, settling onto the wooden bench as if nothing extraordinary had passed. Yet in her chest, a spark had taken root, one she could not name but would not let die. The trailer door slammed shut, the lock clanging into place. Dust rose, the smell of sweat and fear lingering in the air. The crowd dispersed with laughter and mutters of doom. "She'll regret it," someone sneered. "That horse will kill her," another whispered. Their voices trailed into nothing as the wagon pulled away, leaving behind only the echo of disbelief. Lila did not look back. Her eyes remained fixed on the trailer where the untamable horse thrashed, his rage like a storm against steel walls. She leaned forward, whispering so softly that only she could hear, "They don't know you, but I will." And in that moment, though the world had branded him a monster and her a fool, she believed, fiercely, stubbornly, with all the quiet strength she had left, that their story had only just begun. The trailer rattled over uneven roads, each jolt sending a fresh wave of furious thrashing from inside. The stallion's hooves struck metal with a rhythm that echoed like thunder, yet Lila sat still on the bench, her small hands gripping her knees, her eyes locked forward. Every crash, every violent shake of the trailer only deepened the stares of passers-by who shook their heads in pity or disbelief. But she refused to flinch. She had chosen this path, and fear would not be the thing to unmake her. When they reached the farm, the air smelled of damp earth and weathered wood. The land was modest, marked by fences that sagged with age and a barn that creaked with every gust of wind. It was not the kind of place anyone expected to tame a beast, but it was the only home she had. As the trailer door groaned open, the stallion exploded outward, wild and unstoppable. His hooves tore into the dirt, nostrils flared, eyes flashing with fury at his confinement. The men who had helped bring him here swore under their breath and stepped back, shaking their heads. None dared follow when he smashed against the corral fence, testing its strength with every muscle he had. Lila moved slowly, her boots pressing into the soil with deliberate weight. She carried no rope, no whip, nothing to command his obedience. She simply stood before the corral, her arms at her sides, watching him as the others whispered about her recklessness. The stallion circled the enclosure like a predator, his body coiled with tension, ears pinned flat. Every snort was a warning, every lash of his tail a declaration of war. Still, she didn't move. Days passed like this. Each morning, Lila rose before the sun and sat by the corral. She brought water and feed, setting them inside without forcing closeness. The stallion, now called Shadow in her heart, though she dared not speak it aloud where others might mock, refused at first, tossing the buckets, spilling everything she offered. He would not be tamed by tricks of kindness, not yet. But she did not stop. She waited. When he raged, she let him rage. When he threatened, she stayed still. And when his wild eyes finally flickered toward her with something other than fury, she held her breath and let the moment pass, patient as stone. One evening, when the sky burned with the colors of dusk, she dared to step closer. The stallion stomped, the sound sharp, but she did not retreat. Her voice, quiet and even, slipped into the air. "I won't hurt you." He snorted, ears twitching, muscles rippling with suspicion. The words meant nothing to him, but the tone, gentle, steady, seemed to reach past his defenses. She repeated it, not louder, but softer still, until her voice was like the wind brushing through grass. When darkness fell, she remembered. The image of her mother came unbidden, strong hands guiding a trembling colt, soft words carrying more weight than any rope. Her mother had believed that every wild creature carried story, and every story could be understood if one had the patience to listen. Those lessons, once half forgotten, now anchored Lila's resolve. She had lost her mother, lost the certainty of safety, but here was something she could still hold to, a promise made in silence, that no soul deserved to be thrown away as worthless. The nights were hardest. Storms rolled through, rain pelting the roof of the barn, lightning splitting the sky. Shadow screamed into the thunder, crashing against the walls of his enclosure, his terror masquerading as rage. Lila sat through it all, soaked to the bone, her body trembling with cold, but her presence unwavering. At dawn, when exhaustion painted her face pale, she whispered again, "I'm here." He did not charge her. He did not strike. He only watched, and that was enough to kindle hope. Weeks bled together, and whispers spread through the village. Neighbors leaned over fences, muttering to each other about the girl with the cursed horse. "She's wasting her time. That beast will kill her." Some shook their heads in pity, others laughed, waiting for the inevitable failure. But their words could not reach the quiet determination that had taken root inside her. She had begun to see more than his rage. She saw the flicker of hesitation when he looked at her, the brief moments when his ears lifted, curious despite himself. Each small change was a victory. The first breakthrough came not with fanfare, but with silence. She had been sitting as usual, a book open in her lap, though her eyes often drifted to him instead of the page. Hours passed with nothing but the buzz of summer insects filling the air. Then, without warning, Shadow stepped closer, not with trust but with calculation, testing the boundaries. Lila did not move. Her heart raced, but she kept her breath steady. Inch by inch, his muzzle lowered, nostrils flaring, as he caught her scent. For a heartbeat, time stopped. His breath warmed her hand, and though he bolted back in the next instant, the moment had happened. She smiled for the first time in weeks. But not everyone celebrated. One afternoon, as she worked silently near the barn, she overheard the sheriff's voice carrying through the wind. "If that horse gets loose, there'll be blood. She's playing with fire, and it's only a matter of time. Better to put him down now." Her chest tightened, anger and fear tangling inside her. She pressed her palm against the rough wood of the barn wall, grounding herself. She knew the threat was real. The town would not wait forever to see if she could succeed. That night, her dreams were filled with storm and fire, visions of Shadow dragged away, his wild eyes fading into nothing. She woke with determination sharper than before. Failure was no longer just her loss, it would mean his end. And she could not allow that. The next day, she entered the corral for the first time. Gasps rose from the watchers who had gathered at a distance, eager for spectacle. Shadow spun, muscles taut, the whites of his eyes flashing. Lila's hands trembled, but she forced herself to take one step, then another, her voice steady though her body wanted to flee. "It's all right," she whispered. He lunged once, hooves tearing up the soil, but she stood her ground. His charge slowed, halted just shy of her. For a long breath, they stared at each other, two wills colliding in silence. And then, without warning, he turned his head away. It was not surrender, not yet, but it was the first crack in his armor. Lila exhaled, her knees weak, but her spirit burning stronger. She had crossed a line that could never be undone. As the sun set that evening, the corral was quiet. The stallion stood near the far side, his body no less powerful, no less dangerous, but his eyes watched her with something new, curiosity, a flicker of recognition. She leaned against the fence, exhaustion heavy on her, and allowed herself the smallest whisper of triumph. The world believed she was chasing madness, but deep within, she knew the truth. The battle had only begun, and she would not stop until Shadow himself chose to fight beside her. The morning sun stretched gold across the fields, and for the first time since Shadow had arrived, Lila entered the corral without hesitation. Her movements were calm, her breath even, her eyes steady. The stallion tracked her every step, his body tense, but no longer explosive. Weeks of quiet persistence had worn down the edges of his rage, leaving behind something raw, uncertain, and curious. She carried no tools of control, only a small bucket of water and a steady patience that had become her shield. He didn't charge. He didn't bolt. He only watched. For her, that was enough to begin. Each day grew into ritual. She moved in rhythm with him, circling when he circled, pausing when he paused. She let him test her, pushing close only to retreat, demanding without words that she respect the space he claimed. And she did. But little by little, the distance shortened. By the end of the first week, he would approach within arm's reach before snorting and veering away. By the second, he lingered longer, his ears tilting forward instead of flat against his skull. Progress came in fragments, fragile yet precious. Her own body bore the proof of struggle. Bruises painted her arms where he had lashed out, her palms blistered from the fences she climbed in haste when things turned violent. Yet she wore these marks like badges, reminders that trust was carved slowly, not handed freely. Each scar hardened her resolve, each ache deepened her connection to the beast who fought her with every instinct. One afternoon, with the air warm and heavy, she reached a turning point. Shadow stood still, sides heaving after a restless morning, sweat darkening his coat. Lila stepped forward, extending a hand no longer trembling. The world seemed to hold its breath. His nostrils flared, catching her scent, the faint salt of her skin. He lowered his head, not in surrender but in hesitation, and allowed her fingertips to brush against the velvet of his muzzle. For an instant, he did not pull away. The contact was brief, fleeting as smoke, but to her it was victory enough to steal her breath. That night, sitting in the quiet barn, she whispered aloud the name she had kept to herself. Shadow. The word drifted into the air, soft as a prayer. He flicked an ear toward her voice, but did not react otherwise. Still, the name felt right, as if it had always belonged to him, and she vowed to speak it until he recognized it as his own. But hope was not without its shadows. The sheriff returned, his boots crunching against gravel, his tone hard. The town's losing patience. One mistake, and that horse is finished. His warning burned in her chest, but she met his gaze with a steadiness he had not expected. "He won't hurt anyone," she said, though fear gnawed beneath her words. The sheriff shook his head, muttering that she was blinded by foolishness, then left with the promise that time was running out. Pressure mounted. The villagers spoke in hushed voices, waiting for disaster. Each step forward felt fragile, easily undone by the slightest misstep. And then came the storm. It began with distant thunder rolling low across the hills, shadows lengthening, wind clawing at the farm. Shadow grew restless, pacing with ears pricked and muscles quivering. When lightning split the sky, his panic erupted. He slammed against the corral, boards cracking under his weight, his screams piercing through the downpour. Lila rushed into the rain, slipping in the mud, her voice lost in the roar of the storm. She tried to calm him, but he reared, hooves slicing the air dangerously close. One strike grazed her shoulder, the pain sharp, sending her stumbling to her knees. The villagers who had come to watch shouted for her to run, their cries drowned by thunder. Through the chaos, she lifted her face, rain streaking down like tears, and met Shadow's wild eyes. "It's me," she shouted, though her voice barely carried. "I'm not leaving." Her chest heaved, her body aching, yet she refused to retreat. The stallion froze for the briefest heartbeat, as if her stubbornness reached him through the storm. Then, with a final surge, he broke the corral's weakened boards and vanished into the night. Despair crushed her as she fell into the mud, the world spinning in lightning flashes. Villagers pulled her back, some murmuring that she should let him go, others insisting it was the proof they had always predicted. But as soon as dawn broke, battered and bruised, she set out with a rope and determination burning in her chest. She would not lose him, not after coming so far. The search stretched through the day, her legs weary, as she combed fields and woods, calling his name again and again. Hours passed with nothing but silence, until at last, in the dim light of evening, she found him. He stood at the edge of a creek, sides heaving, eyes wide but not blind with terror. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean, and in its wake Shadow seemed smaller somehow, not in size but in spirit, exhausted, vulnerable. Lila approached slowly, each step careful, her voice soft. "You ran, but I followed. I'll always follow." He pawed the ground, uncertain, but did not bolt. She drew closer, lifting her rope, but not casting it. Instead, she lowered it to the ground, showing him it was his choice. Minutes passed, the air heavy with silence. Finally, he stepped forward, pressing his muzzle against her shoulder, trembling but willing. Tears stung her eyes as she wrapped her arms gently around his neck. For the first time, he did not resist. They returned together, not as captor and captive, but as two souls bound by shared struggle. The villagers watched in stunned silence, whispers rippling through the crowd. Some still doubted, some still feared, but none could deny what they had seen. The impossible was beginning to bend. That evening, as Shadow rested in a repaired corral, Lila sat nearby, exhaustion pulling at her but pride filling her chest. The setback had nearly broken them, yet it had also revealed something stronger than fear. Shadow had run, but he had also returned. And though the sheriff's threat still loomed, though the town still waited for failure, she felt a new certainty rising within her. The journey was far from over. Shadows lingered, and dangers still pressed close. But she knew now that he was listening, if only in fragments. Each day forward would demand more courage, more trust, and more strength than she had ever given before. Yet, as she looked at the stallion standing calmer than it had ever been, she whispered once more, steady and sure, We'll prove them wrong. The night closed around them, stars emerging in the quiet sky. The world had not yet accepted their bond, but in that fragile stillness, both girl and horse understood something vital. They were no longer alone in the fight. The weeks that followed the storm became a test of endurance, a relentless shaping of trust through small steps and quiet victories. Shadow no longer met her presence with rage. Instead, he lingered near her, his massive body carrying less tension each day. Lila moved with patience, her touch light, her voice steady, teaching him that the world did not always demand a fight. Yet the sheriff's words still echoed in her mind, a shadow heavier than the stallion's own name. If she failed, he would be taken from her forever. The opportunity to silence those doubts came with the announcement of a county fair. Among the contests, a special demonstration was arranged, a test of obedience, control, and partnership between horse and rider. To most, it was a show of skill and pride. To Lila, it was a final chance. If Shadow could carry her in front of the judges and the watching crowd, calm and steady, then no one could deny his transformation. If he failed, if he lashed out, he would be marked dangerous beyond redemption. The night before the fair, she lay awake in the loft of the barn, listening to Shadow's shift in his stall. Fear gnawed at her resolve. What if the crowd frightened him? What if the noise pulled the fury back to the surface? She rolled onto her side, staring into the darkness. Failure would mean not just losing him, it would mean betraying the trust they had built together. Her mother's words echoed faintly in memory. Every wild heart just needs someone to believe in it. She clung to that thought until sleep finally pulled her under. Dawn broke crisp and clear. The fairgrounds buzzed with life, bright banners snapping in the breeze, the air thick with the scent of fried food, and laughter echoing between stalls. But in the heart of the arena, silence seemed to stretch as Lila led Shadow forward. Gasps rose from the crowd. Whispers spread like fire. That's the beast from the auction. She's mad to ride him. It'll end in blood. The sheriff stood at the rail, arms folded, his expression grim, as if waiting for proof of what he had always warned. Shadow snorted, ears flicking nervously at the noise. His muscles tensed, ready to spring, and for a moment, Lila felt the old terror in her chest. But she placed her hand on his neck, whispering words only he could hear. It's just you and me. Nothing else matters. Slowly, she climbed onto his back, her movements fluid, careful not to spark his panic. The crowd leaned forward, expectant, the silence thick with doubt. At first, Shadow resisted, shifting uneasily beneath her, nostrils flaring at the unfamiliar press of weight. The announcer cleared his throat, preparing to end the attempt before danger struck. But Lila pressed her hands lightly against his neck, guiding with patience rather than force. "Trust me," she whispered. Her heart thundered, her body trembling, but her voice carried the calm she wanted him to feel. The test began. Around the ring, other riders demonstrated their horses with practiced precision, neat trots, graceful turns, heads bowed in obedience. Lila and Shadow stepped into the circle, and the crowd braced for chaos. At first, his movements were sharp, uneven, as though he might rear at any second. The murmur of voices rose, thick with doubt. Yet instead of fighting him, Lila loosened her grip, allowing him freedom. She leaned into his rhythm, letting him set the pace, her trust a silent plea. Something shifted. The stallion's ears tilted back, then forward again, uncertain but listening. His steps steadied, the frantic edge dulling into a cautious rhythm. Lila guided him gently, her voice low, steady as a heartbeat. Together, they moved in circles tighter and tighter, until he began to mirror her intent, not out of fear, but out of choice. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the untamable horse slowed into a smooth trot, his body carrying her without resistance. The announcer faltered, words lost on his tongue. Lila felt the whirl narrow to the steady motion beneath her, the bond that no one else could see, but all were now forced to witness. Shadow's eyes, once wild with fire, glimmered with focus. He was not a beast, not a monster, he was her partner. The climax came when she guided him to halt at the center of the arena. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then, in front of everyone, she released the reins completely and spread her arms wide. The crowd gasped, some shouting warnings. But Shadow did not move. He stood tall, steady as stone, his breath even. The arena filled with stunned silence, then scattered applause that swelled into thunderous cheers. The sheriff's frown faltered, his gaze softening as he muttered to himself, "Maybe she saw what we didn't." The judges exchanged bewildered glances, their pens hovering uncertainly before scribbling the highest marks they had. And Lila, sitting tall on Shadow's back, felt tears sting her eyes. It was not victory she tasted, but vindication. Together, they had proved what no one else believed, that broken souls could heal when given a chance. When she guided him out of the arena, children reached over the rails, eager to touch the horse they once feared. Shadow flicked his ears, wary but calm, no longer bound by rage. The crowd's whispers carried new tones now, admiration, respect, even awe. Where once there had been doubt, now there was belief. Back at the farm, as the sun dipped low and painted the fields in gold, Lila leaned against Shadow's side, her hand resting against his coat. He shifted gently toward her, no longer distant, no longer untouchable. She smiled through quiet tears. "We did it," she whispered. "They'll never call you worthless again." He exhaled softly, warm breath brushing against her cheek, as though answering. The sheriff arrived later, his hat in his hands, his tone different from before. "He's safe now," he said. "You've shown us all. I was wrong." Lila nodded, not with triumph, but with gratitude. Shadow had earned his freedom, not through force, but through the bond they had forged. That night, the barn was quiet, the world still. Lila sat in the straw, her heart heavy with exhaustion but light with hope. She thought of her mother, of the lessons that had carried her here, and whispered into the darkness, "We saved each other." Outside, the stars stretched endless across the sky. Shadow stood near the fence, his dark coat blending with the night, his head lifted high. He was no longer the untamable horse sold at auction. He was her companion, her victory, her proof that even the fiercest storms could be weathered with patience and belief. And as the night deepened, one truth shone brighter than all the doubts that had ever weighed them down. Together, they had rewritten a story the world had already ended. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing. I bring true, heartfelt stories every day.